You are listening to Woodland Walks, a podcast for the Woodland Trust, presented by Adam Shaw. We protect and plant trees for people to enjoy, to fight climate change, and to help wildlife thrive.
Today I am off to meet an author and adventurer, and there's a title you don't get to say or indeed hear very much. He's the author of a whole ton of books, including Microadventures, which I want to talk to him specifically about, but also books called The Doorstep Mile, Local, There Are Other Rivers, Grand Adventures, Moods of Future Joys, My Midsummer Mornings, Thunder and Sunshine, and I could go on and on. And I'm meeting him at a Woodland Trust site called Ashenbank Woods. It's a site of special scientific interest in the Kent Downs area of outstanding natural beauty and is teeming with extraordinary wildlife. So we'll be talking a bit about the woods and a bit about the sort of adventures he's been on and the sort of adventures we might all be able to go on. Anyway, I'll let him introduce himself.
My name's Alistair Humphreys. I'm an adventurer and a writer and tree lover.
Which sounds very exciting. So when you say you're an adventurer, what does that sort of mean?
Well, I was slightly hesitant to say that because I confess I feel more like an ex-adventurer. But I have spent pretty much all my career going off doing big adventures and then coming home and writing and speaking and making films about them. So they've gone ever smaller. So I began by spending 4 years cycling around the world. I've rowed across the Atlantic Ocean, walked across the empty quarter desert, played my violin incredibly badly through Spain, and then gradually smaller onto what I call microadventures, so encouraging people to find short, simple, affordable adventures close to home and squeezing around their busy daily lives.
So that's interesting. You talk about the mini adventures. On a previous podcast, we talked to the natural navigator. I don't know.
Oh yes, Tristan. Well, he could tell you a lot more intelligent things than I can.
No, but
He's
I think
great.
He took very much the similar view of yours. He went, I've done all these big adventures, but actually when you're doing these big adventures, it's all about tech, and I needed satellite link-ups and all sorts of stuff. And actually I was really looking at screens all the time.
Right, yes.
And he was going, the smaller adventures are actually much more revolutionary, because if you go low tech, that's a proper adventure. Just trying to find your way through a wood is a real adventure in a curious sort of way, even more challenging than doing something which sounds really flash.
And what Tristan's done fantastically is taking those skills from bigger journeys down to his literal daily life, hasn't it? If you, I get an email from him, I think it's weekly or so, and it just essentially says, where am I now? And which way am I facing? And from his little clues in the local park, he can tell whether it's north, south, east and west.
Yes, no, you're right. I was very bad at that. And what I've learnt I've already forgotten. So tell me a little bit about why your connection to nature then. How important that is to you, if at all.
So I had a nice happy childhood growing up in the countryside, so as a kid I spent a lot of time running around the fields and woods and streams and things, so I suppose that hammers something deep into your subconscious, although you don't really notice it necessarily as a
Whereabouts
kid.
was that? Where did you go?
In the Yorkshire Dales.
God's own country.
Yes, lovely part of the world.
Yeah, amazing place.
Yeah,
amazing.
so I really enjoyed that, and then my big expeditions, I've spent a lot of time in some of the world's really wild places, and that's a fantastic backdrop to your adventures. But actually I also did a zoology degree, although I found it incredibly boring. And now looking back, I find it amazing that you can find something like that boring. But it's taken me stopping the big adventures, slowing down, paying attention to my local area to build a deeper connection with nature. And I don't know if that's partly just me getting old as well. Right. I suspect there is an aspect of that. But whereas in my youth I was sort of cycling moderately quickly across continents, I'm now pottering around small little parks and I have time to be astonished in a way that you don't necessarily when you're on a big A to B kind of journey.
Yes, there's the mechanics of getting you somewhere are so challenging.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
and you're on a mission.
Yes.
The mission is to go from A to B
Yes.
and not die and to succeed. And that's
Yes.
all. That's all quite. And the backdrop of it all is this wonderful nature. But
Yes.
the things I've been doing more recently, the nature's come to the forefront. I'm not really doing any big, exciting mission, and therefore the paying attention to the small bits of nature and the changing seasons comes to the forefront.
Yes, I did. We're just going to stop here. We're by one of the Woodland Trust signposts about fungi and dead wood and the importance of that. We can talk a bit about that. But I was just thinking about what you said. I did an expedition across the Gobi in Outer Mongolia. I was working in Outer Mongolia, and it was. You're right. It was more interesting in retrospect because when I was there, we were just very concerned about the mechanics of the day, getting through the day, making sure we weren't lost, getting food, all of that, rather than go, this is quite an interesting place.
Yes.
Whereas, because we didn't meander. You go, I think the importance of meandering and almost lost time, and in a way, I think boredom. I mean, it was interesting to talk about kids. I don't know if you've got kids, but I think there's a lot of pressure on people to keep the kids busy, get them to this class, do this, do this, do this. And actually the importance of just going, they're bored now, they'll just go do something is quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic aspect of a bit of woodland like this, isn't it? It's to bring some kids here and essentially say there is nothing to do here, but equally you can do whatever you want. So go on, clear off.
Yes.
Off you go. Climb some of these trees, pick up some sticks, rummage around in the see what you find. And that's the great thing of a woodland like this.
Yeah. Do you have kids?
I do.
Right,
yes.
How old are they?
Well, they are entering the dreaded teenage phase.
Right. Okay.
So the it's really interesting actually because they're completely addicted to their screens, and that would be their preferred choice would be to live in a damp, dark, smelly cave and never emerge.
Okay.
But when I drag them by their hair, kicking and screaming into a wood like this, they're grumpy for a couple of minutes, and then I just say, clear off, go away, and then they love it. And there's a real physical and mental transformation that's clear when you can, once they get out here.
Yeah, so I think that's interesting, and as a parent and everything, I just wonder what your take on trying to engage a younger generation with nature, and whether that's difficult, how you do it, and whether we should be doing that. Is that a concern of us, or just let people do what they want?
I think it's a massive concern, and I also think it's extremely difficult. These screens are deliciously alluring. That's how they're designed. If I was a kid today, I'd love to be just scrolling mindlessly through 1,000 videos of people falling off their bikes. I find it's endlessly addictive.
Yes.
So I think it's very, very hard, and being a parent's exhausting. It's quite easy to not bother with the kicking and screaming, going to the woods, but I think it's really vital to do. And the reward of when you get them out is of seeing how transformative that is for them, but also for yourself, is really good. So I think screens are a massive problem. I think the nature disconnection of our society is a huge problem, both in terms of our physical health, our mental health, but also with our ignorance to the decline of species and the loss of wild places. So I think it's an enormous problem.
And I mean, you're a broadcaster, you create a huge amount of content yourself. So I think there's an interesting question about how to frame that, because I fear then talking about, the trees are disappearing and the wildlife is dying and all that, it turns, everybody, but perhaps especially younger generations off. They go, if it's that blooming terrible, I'd just rather be on my screen. So how do you get that tone right, do you think?
That's a question that I've been thinking a lot about, particularly over the last year or so. I've just finished writing a book which is all about exploring your local area. And when I wrote the book, in the early months of it, it was very much a moaning, ranting, disaster book that everything's doomed and it's all ruined. But as I was reading through my drafts, I was thinking, geez, this is no one's going to read it for a start, but also it's not going to encourage anyone. So, but as the project went on, I realised that I didn't need to frame it like that, because I could look at it another way, which was how much I personally was loving getting out into these small pockets of nature and what benefits I was getting and how much I was enjoying it. And then the more that I personally enjoyed it, the more I start to become connected, and the more I start to care, and the more, hopefully, I start to take action. So I think you're exactly right to try and frame it as a positive thing of saying, hey, get out into X, Y, and Z for these fantastic reasons, and then hopefully the fixing the planet part will take care of itself once there's enough people enthused.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Well, look, we'll carry on, but I said we stopped at this post. So this is the many dead and decaying trees you find here play a vital role in Ashenbank Wood's ecosystem, and that's a theme you'll see in lots of Woodland Trust places where dead wood is actually allowed to stay. In fact, it's not just allowed to stay, it's positively encouraged because of the fungi and the invertebrates, and then all the way up, or the different sort of animals that can live off that. So what looks like sort of untidiness is sometimes a real sort of oasis of life.
And this woodland here was completely smashed by the huge hurricane in 1987. So I think more than most woodlands, there's a lot of fallen down trees in this wood, which I suppose previously would have been carted off and chopped up for firewood or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're walking down this idyllic sort of dappled light coming through the canopy of the still full roof of this woodland. So this is really idyllic, but take me somewhere else. So tell me about those adventures that you've had in these distant lands. Were there any particular that stand out for any particular reason?
Well, given that we're talking about trees, I spent 10 weeks, I think it was, on the frozen Arctic Ocean up near the North Pole, which was a fantastic expedition in itself. But the small detail that sticks with me now is that to get up there, you fly to Canada, then you fly to some smaller place in Canada, and the planes gradually get smaller and smaller, and the safety regulations get more and more lax till you're on the plane with people with rifles and harpoons and stuff. Yeah. But up to this tiny little community right up in the north of Canada, and the people, and I went to visit the primary school there in the morning just to chat to the kids about my adventures and stuff, and they were chatting away about my adventures, and the little kids there were amazed that I'd never seen a polar bear. And my riposte to them was along the lines of, but you've never seen a tree. And where they lived, there were no trees, really? Literally none. They were above the tree line. Right. And that really struck me there, was what it'd be like to grow up in a place with 0 trees. I mean, you get polar bears, which is pretty cool, but I'd be sad to have no trees.
And what was their view of that? Did they go, well, I've never seen, I don't miss, or were they interested in that? Or?
Well, I guess everyone's normal is normal, isn't it? Yeah. They going to school on skidoos and things like that, and it's just fascinating to see the different people's views of normal in the world. And before I started my big adventures, one of the motivating factors for me wanting to go off around the world was that I found where I lived incredibly boring, as a lot of young people do.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, where I live is the most boring place in the universe. Yeah. I need to go far, far away. And it took me going far, far away to realise that actually the stuff I'd left behind is pretty fascinating in its own way, if only you're willing to pay attention to it.
Yes. Gosh, it sounds like almost a line from one of Tolkien's books. There, you do a long adventure to find true interest is nearer to home. So I know you've written lots of things, but you've got a book just come out. Tell me about what's that book about then?
So I've written a book that's called Local, and it's about spending a whole year exploring only the single Ordnance Survey map that I happen to live on. So the whole of Britain's divided up into about just over 400 Ordnance Survey maps. So wherever you live, you could go to your local bookshop and buy your local map. And what I'm trying to do is encourage people to do that and to realise how much new, undiscovered stuff is on their doorstep. Woodlands, footpaths, hills, fields, but also towns, villages, what's behind the industrial yards, like a proper exploring curiosity to your own backyard.
And how much area does one of those maps cover then?
It's the orange Ordnance Survey maps.
That's
which,
important, is it? Okay.
Yes, well, it is. They're more detailed. So it's roughly 20 kilometres by 20 kilometres.
Right, so a fair amount of...
It's a fair amount, but I've also, in previous times, spent a year crossing an entire continent. In that sense, it felt incredibly tiny to me. And when I began the project, I thought, this map is so small, it's going to be so claustrophobic and so boring. But actually, by the end of the year, I realised, wow, actually, it's enormous. I haven't even begun to cover everything on the map.
So what sort of things did you find there that was a surprise to you then?
So what I did, every week I would go out once a week for the whole year and my rule was to explore 1 grid square a week, so a kilometre square.
Right.
Chosen at random, and the random was really important, because if it wasn't random, all I would do was just choose all the nice bits of woodland around my map. But by making it random, it sent me off to towns and suburbs and motorway junctions and all sorts of random stuff. And I discovered a few things. The first thing I discovered was how little I knew this area that I thought I knew very well indeed. The second thing that I realised was that yeah, of course it's nice to go out to woods and hills and streams and stuff, but also I was surprised how much I loved the forgotten grid squares, the abandoned bits, the broken down, fallen down, behind the warehouse kind of landscapes, like what's behind the supermarket car park. And I found in these forgotten edgelands a real sense of wildness and solitude that I didn't get in somewhere lovely. I mean, this wood we're in now is lovely, but you're not going to get much solitude. There's a lot of dog walkers wandering around. And whereas if you're sort of behind some factory in some regenerating thicket, you think, wow, no one comes here. This feels adventurous. This feels wild. No one on the planet knows where I am. I'm only 20 minutes from a massive city. So I really was surprised how much I like the forgotten corners of my map.
I mean, it sounds romantic the way you describe it, but behind a dumpster or a big factory, I don't really want to go there.
Why not?
Well, because it's not pretty. It's probably some unsavoury characters hanging around there. It might be more dangerous than crossing, some wild tundra. So it doesn't attract. You're smart. I mean, but it does attract you, genuinely?
No, I think I'd have agreed with you entirely beforehand. It seems much nicer to come to a pretty woodland and stroll around there. What surprised me was how rarely I saw people when I was out and about. We live in a very crowded country. I live in a crowded corner of the country, and yet once I was off meandering, once you're slightly off the beaten track, it felt like I often had the place to myself. In terms of being scared, I never had any problems at all, but I was very conscious that I'm a 6 foot tall white man who's quite good at running, and that the countryside in general is not equally accessible to everyone. That really struck home to me in the year, how the sort of privilege I have of being able to essentially wander wherever I want. And the worst thing that's happened is someone will say, go away, and I'll go, oh, I'm terribly sorry, and be all sort of posh and cheerful, and it'll be fine. And it's not fair, and it's not right that there's that inequality.
I wonder what you feel, because we're talking now a little after there was a big fuss in the newspapers about Kirsty Allsop, a child who went off travelling, and I think he was 16 or something like that, and it raised the debate, whether that's right or wrong, and people have their own views. It raised the debate about adventure, what it is, how much freedom we should give younger people, and there were lots of comments. Look back a generation, my parents' generation, they were, people of 17, 18 were fighting in wars, so the idea of going on Eurorail doesn't sound that adventurous by comparison, but it does engage with the natural world, doesn't it? You've done very adventurous things. What do you think about our position on safety now, the vibe about that?
I think a relevant aspect of that discussion for what we're talking about today is if you look at the roaming distances that kids have from home, and you can see statistical maps of this online of how far our grandparents are allowed to go from home. They'd get on their bicycle with a pickled egg and they'd go for a month and then come home for their tea, all that sort of stuff. When I was a kid, I was basically in the Yorkshire Dales. I was basically allowed to go wherever I wanted, and then I'd just come home when I was hungry, and of course I had no cell phone, and then kids today would not be generally allowed that sort of thing, and they're kept very much closer to home. And I think that trusting young people in wild places is an important thing to do.
Well, on that note of wild places and adventure, we talked a lot about maps, and if you want to visit Ashenbank Wood and are looking for a map, it is grid reference TQ675692, map reference Explorer 163, and OS Landranger 177. Good luck with finding this particular wood. I hope you enjoy it. And until next time, of course, happy wandering.
Thank you for listening to the Woodland Trust Woodland Walks. Join us next month when Adam will be taking another walk in the company of Woodland Trust staff, partners and volunteers. And don't forget to subscribe to the series on iTunes or wherever you are listening. And do give us a review and a rating. If you want to find out more about our woods and those that are close to you, check out the Woodland Trust website. Just head to the Visiting Woods pages. Thank you.